Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Cinema Crunch. My name is Rose Donahue, and we are filming at the Quantum Arc Media Studio in Las Vegas, Nevada. Technology has done so much to impact filmmaking. Today, we'll be talking about motion capture for both film and video games with stuntman and co-founder of SuperAlloy Interactive, Eric Jacobus.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Eric. Super excited about it. So I'm going to admit, and I kind of said this to you already, you're doing very technical work with the motion capture. So this is new to me. So I'm excited. I've done some research, but I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit about your experience actually doing it.
Okay.
Why don't we start with a little bit of history on you?
Sure.
You've been doing stunts for a long time. You've been studying stunts and violence. Can you tell me how you got started?
I've been studying violence. That is the truth. You know, it started out back when I was a kid in a small town in Northern California and really wanted to make action films. I was a big fan of Hong Kong movies. Started out actually as a techie. I was a programmer. I did PHP and Visual Basic Programming when I was 15. And I made a website where I reviewed Hong Kong movies, Jackie Chan movies and things like that, which were kind of fresh at the time. This was in 1997, 1998. And reviewed so many of these movies that I decided, well, why don't I just go try and make my own? Because I started seeing how these action scenes were put together. And I didn't have much martial art experience, but I figured, I'll give it a shot and I'll start training. And, if I ever wanted to actually do this in real life, I knew I had to actually put content out there.
For sure.
Because we're so far away from Hollywood and I was so inexperienced that if I wanted a shot, I had to just make my own stuff. I wasn't going to go down to LA and ace an audition, right? I was going to be competing against people that had done martial arts their entire lives. So, but I found that I could fall down pretty well. I could hit the pavement without pads pretty well. And so over the years, we did a bunch of short films and did some feature films, and then I did end up working in Hollywood. Did some stunts in Hollywood. They don't really like. And by the way, when I was doing these short films, as you know, when you're making films, you learn to do everything. You understand the writing. Oh, yeah. You might just want to do acting, but you're going to learn writing, producing, directing. You're going to learn the whole thing. And I learned camera and editing also, and how camera and editing affect action. And it was so critical that camera and editing were right, And that was why I was such a fan of the Hong Kong films, because they really nailed that. And I took that model, and that's what we did our short films with. But Hollywood has a very different model. They have a very kind of almost like an assembly line, where as a performer, you go in, they say, do your stunt, and they don't really want you to tell them how to shoot it. They've got that figured out. They've already storyboarded it. It's already done, right? So, and then I did some jobs doing previs and things like that where I could actually use my filmmaking skills. But then I did this short, goofy YouTube series called Tekken in Real Life, where I copied video game moves. And then Sony found it, and they hired me to do Kratos' motion capture. For God of War. And I did the combat motion capture for God of War, as well as for, a bunch of other games after that. What a wild ride for you.
It makes so much sense. That's really the way to get into the way to find opportunities today is to make your own content. And just if you're not doing it, you're not getting practice.
Exactly. So. Yeah, exactly the same with like the open source movement wouldn't exist if people weren't in their basements just programming away and making stuff, right?
Yeah.
Not that education is bad, but it didn't start there. It starts with people wanting to just make something.
So I'm interested hearing that you started doing programming and tech stuff, because that's so relevant to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, right.
I didn't see it coming.
It all adds up. Yeah, it's kind of a domino effect.
I mean, it helped in terms of making websites and actually getting our name out there. And, you're talking about before YouTube, back when you had 20 megabytes on a GeoCities page, and you were, we managed, and I managed to get the software and edit and make a website out of PHP, and it was very easily searchable. And, and that helped us for a while. And then for a long time, that tech stuff kind of laid dormant.
Sure.
And then when we actually made a company, SuperAlloy, we started actually utilizing that technology again. And now it comes like full circle now.
Totally.
Almost 20 years later.
Yeah. So you're using the XSEN?
We use XSENs.
XSENs. Okay.
XSENs, yeah.
That's the way to say it. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and so with motion capture is pretty simple.
Okay.
You put a suit on.
Which is the XSENs.
Which is the XSENs.
For anyone who doesn't know.
That's our suit. And then other people use Vicon Sometimes you'll see behind the scenes of Andy Serkis and these guys wearing motion capture suits, and they'll have these reflective balls on it. Those are called passive optical systems, where there are a bunch of cameras and they literally just look at you and they figure out what you look like in 3D, and then they record it into a computer, right? And then with XNs, it's inertial, so there's no camera. And so it's just these accelerometers that are in the suit. It moves around, but it works the same way. So you move around, it records it into a computer, and now you have computer data on movement.
That's awesome. Yeah. So with SuperAlloy Interactive, you're recording those things and then just sending that content off to
pretty much
the editors, or
pretty much. Well, we will have a game company hire us to do any number of things in a game or a movie sometimes. But let's say, for example, a game, they say, we want you to do motion capture for our in-game characters, and also we want you to previs for our cinematics, for example. And so I might help create the shot list, if we're building a navigation system for a character or a combat system, or they will have their idea. Whatever it is, we shoot with them. They do it over Skype a lot of the time. Sometimes they come here. Sometimes we take the system to them because it's portable. So it's very modular. And the nice thing about the XN system is that it can kind of fit into a production workflow anywhere they need it to fit. So we're very agile.
That's great.
Yeah. And so we find that we're able to get things done very quickly.
That's great. Yeah, it's always good.
Plus, since we have, since I'm a stuntman, I can do almost any motion capture that they need. I don't need to go and cast stunt talent.
That helps, yeah.
But, we're based in Vegas, and I can get any physical talent that, exists under the sun.
There's a lot of opportunities here.
So if I can't do it, I'm not going to learn how to be a contortionist for a movie, right? I don't have enough time. So I'll just hire one.
Perfect. Yeah. I was wondering, what's the benefit of having someone in one of these motion capture suits, whatever it may be? What's the benefit of doing that rather than having an animator just animate someone?
Sure. There are costs and benefits. The benefit is that you get very human-like movement. Takes less time. Of course, there's a style to hand animation, and it'll always be around, right? It's like claymation will always be around. Painting will always be around. And then photography made realistic painting, in a sense, right? But people still paint. And so it's a stylistic choice a lot of the time with game companies. What they're trying to do, typically when somebody wants to do motion capture in a game, it's because they're trying to create a level of immersion that looks realistic, right? And not fantastical, right? Even for sometimes with fantasy, they'll still capture human movement. But the thing is that in 3D, when you capture human movement, you can kind of stretch things out, and you can do a standard punch, but then they can kind of stretch it out and make the arm really long, and then they can move the spine around. They can really kind of mess with it and make it look a little bit creature-like, for example. But if they're trying to get humanoid, realistic movement, they want to touch it as little as possible. They don't really want to mess with it, because the more that they touch it, the more it starts getting into that uncanny valley kind of area. And that's typically why they go with motion capture.
Okay, very
You could do it with animals too. You could do it with horses and dogs. It's been done. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Like a little dog suit.
Yeah, a little dog suit. That's right. They'll put the little markers on it.
That's awesome. I think I did see a photo of that, and it did look adorable.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. Very cool. So yeah, you guys pass it off, you let the editors do their thing, and then you're on to the next one.
That's it, yeah.
Awesome.
That's it. And part of that process too is helping them figure out, they give us the moves, but then part of what we do also is help them understand, or help them to decide on kind of like a style of action for their game. And so, I'll do the movement, but there's also going to be a style when there's interaction, right? Like when the main character fights a villain in the game, should it be hyper violent, right? Should it be funny? And so that's what we'll also do, is consult with the game developers and say, what kind of game are you making? Are you making a hack and slash? Well, maybe the fight should be short and sweet, right? It just depends on, and that's kind of the action code that we help them develop. And we figure that out. We figure out how to make an action code based on a bunch of different criteria.
Okay. When you say action code, that's the style of fight.
It's the style of movement. It's the choreography. It's sometimes it's where they put the camera, for example, in a cinematic in a cinematic scene in the game or for a movie, obviously, and editing too. Editing affects that code.
Sure.
The way that you edit a fight scene together, how much time the human eye has to focus on a piece of action, that determines how people receive that action.
Yes. So, oh my gosh, I'm so in the level of depth you have and knowledge you have about fighting and people perceiving fighting is just fascinating.
It's because I had to do it for 20 years to make these short films. I had no choice.
You had to learn it. Yeah.
I had to learn it.
If you're going to be the best, be the best.
Yeah.
Kind
And
of thing.
you have to learn all the different styles. And it was, it was a requirement that I learn how to edit this. What you're hearing is 20 years of failure.
Okay.
Right, and 20 years and some successes, obviously, but doing a lot of this stuff and directors saying, yeah, but that editing's too slow. I'm trying to get people confused. People would say that kind of stuff, or oh, this choreography is too it's like it's too G-rated. It really needs to kind of send a message that this guy's dangerous, right? Things like that. So as an amateur choreographer back in the day, I would go in with this kind of vision of how I wanted things to work, but I wasn't taking into consideration what the audience was and what the product was.
Yes.
And that stuff is what determines what kind of code you're going to use.
So
in the
key.
Game.
Yeah. I think that happens for a lot beginning filmmakers, right? It's about the art or whatever.
Our vision,
Exactly.
but it has to serve the audience.
Totally.
And if it's not, then you're just, why make it?
Yeah. Yeah. And we had talked a little bit about the anthropology of violence as well.
Yeah.
So how have you used that study to inform your filmmaking?
Well, if you think of choreography as planned movement, then action choreography would be planned violence. And, my motto is that if we want to understand choreography, we really need to understand violence. And that can be really uncomfortable for people. But we're adults here, and what we will do is my study goes into the neuroscience and the anthropology of how humans not only do but perceive violence, right? And what is it about humans that is particular in that we have wars, civil wars, blood fused, we murder, we use tools, we use weapons, and no animal does this, right? And the short answer is that humans have a mirror neuron system that is far more complex than other animals' mirror neuron systems. And essentially, the way that the mirror neuron system works is that when I grab a banana, for example, right, a neuron fires in my brain. When I see somebody else grab a banana, that same neuron fires in my brain. So what my brain is doing is creating a simulation of what I'm seeing other people doing.
Okay.
And I might act on that. I might not. If I see violence, I might act on that. I might not. Right. What I'm doing a lot of the time. So, if somebody's going to reach their hand out and do this, then I can read their intention, and that's what everybody is able to grab something. Yeah. So what we're actually doing is we're creating a simulation of the intentions of people around us. That's what humans do from birth. That's how we learn. That's how we learn. It's how we learn language. It's how we learn social cues. And some people have deficiencies in this, and they have a hard time picking up social cues. Some people are inundated by it, and they get too much social cues, and they have to put headphones on. I think autism has this problem sometimes where they're actually over inundated with social cues. And so with that, the thing about human violence then is that if we're in a fight, not that we ever would be, but if we were to get into a fight, right?
Yes.
And you made me angry, and I went like this, and I reached behind my back. You immediately create a whole list of intentions, potentially, of what I could be doing.
Whatever you could have back there.
Right. So if you're expecting a worst case scenario, like I have a gun, whatever it is, you might then go for your gun first and kill me. That's how human violence escalates. Animal violence doesn't have this problem because animals know exactly what weapons are at stake. There are no tools.
Weapons. No, yeah.
Yeah, you have their claws,
thumbs.
claws and teeth, right?
Right.
So animals don't fight to the death very much. Not within their own clan, that's for sure. They'll kill others, but they won't rival to the death. And so that kind of propensity of human violence to escalate to the extremes, René Girard calls it escalation to the extremes. And this is where I get all of my information from about this is from him. And the ancient society realized that this is such a contagious problem, where if you and I are escalating violence and people are also reading that violence and, I kill you and then somebody avenges you, this is particularly human. It's particularly human.
Okay.
Other animals don't really do this stuff. They don't have blood feuds. They don't have civil wars, but we do. So human society created all these interesting rituals in order to clamp down on this stuff, ranging from, okay, stop, let's set you up in a ring, duel to the death, go. And the winner,
at least it's in a ring.
Then it's in a ring, and the winner is the winner, and nobody can avenge the loser. Right?
Got it.
That's what a duel to the death was. So that would be, samurai, gunslingers. They had that kind of code with them, right? And then, but that still causes blood. Blood is a sign of violent contagion. If you want to try and cut down on the blood, you do sport. So maybe a fist fight, put gloves on. Now it's a little bit safer, a little bit less blood. And then you can get into combat sports. And then finally, if you really want to make it totally uncontagious, you do sort of ritualized choreography, which would be like a warrior dance or, traditional kung fu.
Yeah. So you've done all this research. And all of those are factors into how you decide.
All of those different methods of controlling violence and of perceiving violence too, because people are always going to be party to this. Those all represent film genres.
Ah, okay.
So the duel to the death, well, if you look at samurai films and Western films, they're shot the same in a lot of ways. The pacing is very much the same. The fight scenes themselves play out very similarly because there's this extreme deference to the weapon because they know that the minute somebody is touched by that weapon, it's death. So a lot of the choreography is build up. Now, it might be portrayed differently. In the Western, you go in here with the eyes. And with the samurai film, maybe they'll just sit wide, kind of like a kabuki theater. And then, the fight's over. Both of them.
Quick, yeah.
Yeah, because there was this respect for that weapon.
Yes, okay.
And that might be something where we say, is it that kind of game?
Right.
Is your hero killed with one hit? Maybe we play it like that.
Right.
Maybe we play the cinematics like that too. Wouldn't make sense if the cinematics looked like a kung fu movie, but you could be killed with one hit. It doesn't really play together, right? So that's the kind of stuff that we consult people with. Yeah. And try and lay out all of that foundation.
I know you mentioned in one of the videos I saw online, vertical integration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you kind of break that down a little bit for me?
So exactly. And that plays into this exactly. When we were doing our action films back in those indie days, I guess we're still indie in a lot of ways to this day. We still make stuff. We're always trying, we always have to try to.
It's always good to keep making something. Yeah, to keep
making something. Even when you're a pro.
Exactly.
Like if the only thing that you're able to do is with your latest contract, it's like that might not come out for 3 years. How are you going to make a demo reel? So we're always testing it out. The process that we use is something I call vertical integration. If you look at the best action films, John Wick, The Raid, Ong Bak, The Matrix, what you'll find is that they have a very similar process that Hong Kong films had, which is that every piece of the production pipeline understood the action. Every piece of it. Old school Hong Kong Chinese martial art movies, the camera guys probably had some kind of cultural understanding of martial arts. The editor understood it. And of course, the performers and the choreographers understood it too. And we took that and did indie films with that same process. And so I liken it to a Jenga tower, where if any one of those pieces is out of whack, if the camera doesn't see the action, then it falls over.
Right.
The whole tower falls over. Now you'll still have kind of a rubble of a fight scene. You'll still have a movie.
You can have a scene, I guess.
Have a scene. There's movement. Yeah, they moved around and fought. And unfortunately, if that movie does well, despite that terrible action scene, the producer might look at that and say, well, apparently that rubble works.
You're like, no, but it could be better.
It's hard to get in there and do that. But then when you have movies like The Matrix, they come in where you have, Hong Kong filmmakers leaving Hong Kong before the handover in 1997. They all came to the U.S. You had Rush Hour. Sammo Hung did, Martial Law. Michelle Yeoh was in Tomorrow Never Dies. Jet Li did Lethal Weapon 4. They all came over at that time and introduced their way of filmmaking, and it totally blew up. It was a huge success. Yeah. And Yuen Woo-ping was another guy, and he worked with the Wachowskis. And the Wachowskis said, you know what, just make these action scenes how you want to make them. And he integrated the filmmaking style with the rest of the film. And that's why those fights are seamless in that film.
Yeah, I want to, so just to kind of break down vertical integration a little bit more, the blocks on the Jenga tower, from what I have written, there's previs, choreo, performance, camera work, edit, and sound.
Yes.
So if any of those elements are out of place, that's when the whole scene gets a little out of whack.
Yep. That's when it just doesn't feel like it's part of the movie.
Sure.
Something's just off.
Yeah.
And again, with action, it might pass still, right? A better example would be comedy.
Okay.
If you have a great comedic scene, it's because you have all those elements in place. And if a joke or a comedy scene fails, the movie fails.
Sure.
So I even though we're in action, I actually use comedy as an example a lot of the time.
Yeah.
To try and push the message that if your action fails, the movie will fail, even though it might not. But I do want them to believe that.
Depending on whether flashy explosions or whatever in there.
You never know.
Yeah, well, comedy is high risk and
Absolutely.
Action is high risk.
Yeah,
so it makes sense
absolutely.
that they have that kind of handshake and parallel.
Yeah, and it's really hard in the Hollywood kind of pipeline. It's really hard to make comedy work. I think that's why the sitcom is such a success, is because they made that work within that pipeline. But I mean, making like another Pink Panther film, it's almost impossible. You can't do it because you have to have your camera and editing department on board with the comedy, and you don't even know who the editor is when you're shooting it.
Sure.
So you just don't really get those films unless they're these indie films. And plus, if you're trying to make a global film, trying to sell comedy globally now, it's a huge risk. Even though I think it's possible, but usually a distributor is not going to want it. They're just going to.
It's tough. Well, there's so many different types of comedy. Yeah. I mean, just across the U.S., but around the world, people really have different feelings towards it.
But like the vertical integration is how we approach action to try and really work the action scene into the process of the game in this case, and in movies too, if we can. But with gaming, it's actually easier because in gaming, all processes are happening at the same time already.
Okay, how do you mean by all processes?
Because they're at the same time that they are creating characters and levels, they're doing the sound design at the same time. It doesn't all come at the end. It's all happening at the same time. So it looks like a spiral. All these processes going at the same time, and there are these checkpoints where they make a vertical slice, and they're doing alpha and beta and all that stuff. And so since they're doing everything at the same time, they understand vertical integration. And it's like second nature to them. Okay. That's how we can work with them so easily.
So you're kind of bringing this game development technique into the film industry.
We're
working on it.
We tried to use it in the film industry, and it's hard because film is linear.
Yeah.
You do the previs, that's done. And you shoot it, and that's done. And then they edit it, and that's done.
You have to plan ahead.
And then the sound, and that's done.
Yeah.
And if not everybody's on board, you make a mistake here, either you got to reshoot it or they're just going to try and fix it over here somehow.
Sure.
And it's not integrated.
Sure.
It's really hard to do that.
It's tricky. Do you prefer working with video games or do you prefer cinema?
Oh, that's tough. That's tough. I mean, there's always a part of me that's going to always want to do films. There's just something, it's so tactile. And, you can never capture human movement exactly with motion capture. I look at motion capture as a new way of telling action stories. And video games the same way, right? What's nice about it too is that indie filmmakers can now get access to software like Unreal, Unity, and make action games, action movies even using 3D. And with a team of 2 people, you could actually make an incredible action movie in 3D. So it's one more tool to really kind of boost the quality of movies in general.
Very cool. Well, are there any other takeaways that you want to share either about the tech behind motion capture or your experience in stories? I know it's a broad question.
That is a broad question.
Tips or tricks for someone getting started?
Okay. I would stick to my philosophy. When we started SuperAlloy, we had a motion capture suit, and we were going almost door to door to indie game companies because we needed to make a demo reel. Because I'm not a game developer. I can make movies. I can do the action, but we needed a game to put the motion capture in to demo what we could do. Sure. And so we would go to these indie developers, and some of them we would almost work for free just to get the footage right at the beginning, and then we also went and I ended up learning how to use Unity in order to make our demo reel.
That's great.
And that was the only way for us to actually prove that we were doing this. And I think that goes for almost anything in the industry and in media. if you're not, if you have to be able to learn how to make something and promote whatever it is that you can do. Otherwise, your resume doesn't really mean anything. Even your IMDb doesn't mean as much anymore. People want to see a reel. People want to see what you're doing and what makes, what is it about your process, your art that makes it unique and marketable.
Very cool.
And if you can actually get your hands around the means of production, which it's free to do almost anything now, then you can get that information out there and show how you can, and that's how you can innovate too.
Yeah, totally.
I think if you're innovating, you're gonna do fine.
That's a good way to look at it, for sure. Yeah, that practical experience. The internet's an amazing thing, and keep creating new things.
That's right.
I love it. Very cool. So where can our audience find out more about you?
You can find us at SuperAlloy Interactive.com. Excuse me. And I'm on Twitter as Eric Jacobus, and YouTube is Eric Jacobus also.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It was awesome. My gosh, I can't believe it's over. There's so many things to talk about. Well,
next time.
Part
2.
Yeah, totally. And thank you all for tuning into this episode of Cinema Crunch. Again, my name is Rose Donahue, and we're filming at the Quantum Arc Media Studio in Las Vegas, Nevada. Catch you next time.